I cannot go in the execution chamber and die in the execution chamber as a liar. And I cannot go in the execution chamber and be executed under the devil. I have to come clean and cleanse my spirit in the name of Jesus Christ. So I have to come clean and tell the world the lies that went on through my mouth. I mean, now prosecutors and cops.
And that you killed 7 men.
Huh?
That you killed those men in cold blood.
Yeah, I got to come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery. As they said, they had it right. Serial killer. Not so much like thrill kill. I was into the robbing biz. I mean, you know, serial killers are in this thrill killing jazz. I was into the robbing, just and eliminate a witness. But still, then again, I got a number, so it's serial killer. But I'm coming clean before I go in that execution chamber and be executed.
What if I told you that between 1989 and 1990, a woman was hunting men along the highways of Florida? Not for money, not for thrills, but because, in her mind, she believed she had no other choice. Her name was Aileen Wuornos. And before you think you know this story, you don't. Because what happened on those dark Florida roads wasn't just about murder. It was about a lifetime of pain that finally exploded into violence. It was about a child nobody wanted who became the woman everyone feared. 7 men, 7 lives ended. And one question that still haunts investigators today: was she a cold-blooded serial killer, or the victim of a system that failed her at every turn? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about good, evil, and the thin line between survival and murder. February 29th, 1956. A leap year baby is born in Rochester, Michigan. But despite the rare date, there was little about Aileen Carol Pittman's arrival that could be called fortunate. From the very beginning, her life was marked by hardship. Her father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a deeply troubled man with a history of serious offenses and severe mental health struggles. Diagnosed with schizophrenia and repeatedly in conflict with the law, he died while incarcerated. Aileen never met him. He left her mother before she was born, yet the legacy of his instability and violence hung over her life, even in his absence. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was only 16, still a child herself. Trying to raise 2 kids, Aileen and her older brother Keith overwhelmed, and without the support she needed, Diane eventually reached a breaking point. When Aileen was 4, she left both children in the care of their grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. Here's something crucial. Aileen never knew they were her grandparents. They legally adopted her and her brother, and she grew up believing they were her parents. That misunderstanding shaped her sense of identity from her earliest memories. But the home she was raised in was not a stable one. Lori struggled with alcohol misuse and had a harsh, unpredictable temper. What should have been a place of safety often became a place of fear. Aileen endured strict discipline and very little affection. Later accounts would suggest that the environment may have included boundary-crossing behavior and emotional neglect. By age 11, Aileen was already interacting with older boys in ways no child should have to navigate. Not out of understanding or genuine choice, but because it was the only form of attention she knew how to seek, trading brief moments of acknowledgement for cigarettes, food, or the feeling of being noticed. At 14, her life took another devastating turn. She was taken advantage of by someone connected to her grandfather, resulting in a pregnancy. The baby, a boy, was placed for adoption immediately after birth. Aileen never met him. He simply vanished from her story. Soon after, her grandmother Britta passed away. Her grandfather then forced her to leave the house. At just 15, with no family support and nowhere to go, Aileen found herself completely on her own. This is the point in her story that should give us pause, because right here, intervention could still have changed everything. But no help arrived. Instead, she learned to survive however she could. She began hitchhiking. She found work on the margins of society. She lived in cars, wooded areas, and motels across Michigan and eventually Florida. The highway became her home, and brief encounters with strangers became her means of getting through each day. And this is vital to understand. During those years filled with instability, danger, and constant survival, something was building inside Aileen. Not malice, not cruelty, but anger, deep, unresolved anger at every person and every system that had failed her. That pressure increased year after year, and eventually, it would erupt. (1986) Daytona Beach, Florida. And here's where the story takes a turn you might not expect. Enter Tyria Moore, Ty, as everyone called her. A hotel maid from Ohio, living a quiet life, trying to make ends meet. She walked into a gay bar one night, and there was Aileen, weathered by life, rough around the edges, but desperate for connection. They fell in love, or at least Aileen did. For the first time in her life, Aileen had something to protect, someone who made her feel like she mattered. Ty became her entire world, and Aileen, she would do anything, and I mean anything, to keep Ty by her side. But here's the complication. Aileen was still working the highways, still trading sex for money, because that's how she supported them both. And Ty? The evidence suggests she knew. She knew where the money came from. She knew what Aileen had to endure, and she accepted it. This codependent, intense, all-consuming relationship became the foundation for everything that was about to happen. Because Aileen wasn't just working anymore. She was providing. She was playing the role of protector, of provider. And the pressure of that role was crushing her. Now, keep this relationship in the back of your mind. Because when the murders begin, you'll need to ask yourself a question. How much did Ty know? And when did she know it? November 30th, 1989. Route 75 in northern Florida. The night is warm, humid. Aileen Wuornos is standing on the side of the highway with her thumb out, wearing tight jeans and a revealing top. Just another night of work. A car pulls over. Inside is Richard Mallory, 51 years old, an electronics store owner from Clearwater. To anyone watching, this looks like every other transaction Aileen has done 1,000 times before. But something is different tonight. Something has shifted. They drive to a secluded area off the highway. Wooded, dark. The kind of place where no one can hear you scream. And here's where the stories diverge, where truth gets murky. According to Aileen's later testimony, Mallory became violent. She claimed he raped her, beat her, tortured her with sexual assault. She said she saw her life flashing before her eyes. And so she fought back. She pulled out a .22 caliber pistol. And she shot him. Not once, not twice, 4 times. In the chest and torso. Richard Mallory died in that car, bleeding out in the Florida wilderness. But here's what makes this case so controversial, so debated even today. Was it self-defense like she claimed? Or was it something darker? After the shooting, Aileen didn't call the police. She didn't seek help. Instead, she robbed him, took his money, his car, his personal belongings. She drove his Cadillac back to the motel where Ty was waiting. And here's the detail that should make you pause. She cleaned the car, methodically, then she and Ty crashed it, staging an accident to explain the damage. Later, they abandoned it. Richard Mallory's body was found on December 13th, 1989, 2 weeks later, in a wooded area in Volusia County decomposed, stripped of identification. Just another unsolved murder on a Florida highway. But it wasn't going to stay unsolved for long, because Aileen Wuornos had just discovered something terrifying. Killing a man was easier than she thought, and it solved her problems, at least temporarily. The bomb had exploded, and now there was no stopping it. What happened next was unprecedented. Between December 1989 and November 1990, 6 more men would die along Florida's highways. 6 more bodies, 6 more families destroyed, and 1 woman who couldn't stop. Let me walk you through each one, because every victim tells us something about what was happening inside Aileen's mind. Victim 2. David Spears, June 1st, 1990, 6 months after Mallory. David Spears, 43 years old, a construction worker from Winter Garden, Florida. He was driving to Orlando to see his ex-wife and their daughter when he picked up Aileen on the highway. His body was discovered on June 6th, shot 6 times with a .22 caliber weapon. 6 times. Found in a wooded area off Highway 19 near Citrus County. His truck was missing. His belongings gone. Here's what's chilling. The method was nearly identical to Mallory's murder. Secluded location, multiple gunshots, robbery, abandonment. Aileen was developing a pattern, a ritual. But why did she kill him? According to her later confessions, he propositioned her for sex. When they got to the secluded area, she shot him. She claimed self-defense again, but investigators found something troubling. No evidence of assault. No signs of a struggle before the shooting. The truth? Aileen had learned that dead men don't fight back. And dead men carry cash, credit cards, vehicles. Everything she needed to survive. Victim 3. Charles Carskadden, June 6, 1990. The same day, David Spears' body was discovered. Charles Carskadden, 40 years old, a part-time rodeo worker from Missouri. He was found in Pasco County, shot 9 times. 9 times. Think about that. That's defense. That's rage. That's overkill. That's someone emptying a gun into another human being because they can't stop themselves. Charles's body was found partially clothed. His car, a 1975 Cadillac, was missing. His personal effects had been stolen. The pattern was solidifying. But here's what investigators would later realize. Aileen was accelerating. The gap between Mallory and Spears was 6 months. The gap between Spears and Carskadden? Less than a week. She was spiraling, losing control, killing more frequently. Victim 4. Peter Symes, June 7th, 1990. Just 1 day after Carskadden. Peter Symes, 65 years old, a retired merchant seaman from Jupiter, Florida. He was driving to visit relatives in Arkansas when he vanished. Here's where this case gets interesting and frustrating for investigators. Peter Symes' body has never been found. Never. Not a trace. But his car? That told a story. On July 4th, 1990, a month later, witnesses in Orange Springs, Florida, saw 2 women crash Symes' 1988 Pontiac Sunbird and flee the scene on foot. They were described as a blonde woman and a brunette woman. The blonde was injured, bleeding from her arm after the crash. Police ran the plates. The car belonged to Peter Symes. And suddenly, investigators had a major break. Witnesses, descriptions, evidence that the killer might be a woman, or women. A composite sketch was created based on the witnesses' descriptions. It would be circulated throughout Florida, and it would eventually lead police right to Aileen's door. Victim 5. Troy Burress, July 30th, 1990. Troy Burress, 50 years old, a sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida. He left his home for work that morning and never came back. His body was discovered on August 4th in a wooded area in Marion County, shot twice with a .22 caliber weapon. His delivery van was found abandoned days later in Ocala, cleaned out. Empty. Troy left behind a wife and children who described him as a loving family man, a hard worker, someone who would help anyone in need. He probably saw Aileen on the side of the road and thought he was doing a good deed by giving her a ride. It cost him his life. Victim 6. Charles Dick, Humphreys, September 11th, 1990. And here's where Aileen made perhaps her most shocking kill. Charles Humphreys, 56 years old, a retired Air Force major and former police chief of Crystal River, Florida. He was also a child welfare investigator, someone who dedicated his life to protecting vulnerable children. The irony is almost too painful to contemplate. His body was found in Marion County, shot 7 times. 7 times. His car, Chevrolet Caprice was found stripped of valuables. His badge, his police radio, his clothes, all taken. Aileen later pawned his belongings. But here's what's haunting. Did she know who he was? Did she know she was killing someone who had spent his career trying to help people like the child she once was? Victim 7. Walter Gino Antonio, November 19, 1990. The final murder. Walter Gino Antonio, 62 years old, a truck driver and security guard from Cocoa, Florida. He was found shot 4 times, his nearly naked body discovered in a wooded area northwest of Cross City. His car was gone, his possessions stolen. By now, Aileen was operating purely on instinct. Hunt, kill, steal, survive, repeat. The humanity had been completely drained from the act. These weren't people anymore in her mind. They were resources, means to an end. 7 men, 7 lives, 7 families shattered, and 1 woman who had become exactly what the world always told her she was, a monster. But the question remains, and this is what you need to grapple with. Was Aileen Wuornos born a monster? Or did we create her? By late 1990, law enforcement agencies across Florida were connecting the dots. Same gun, same method, same type of victim, middle-aged men traveling alone. Same pattern of robbery and abandonment. They had a serial killer on their hands, but they didn't know who. Then came the break they needed. Those witnesses from the Peter Seams car crash. The composite sketches of the 2 women seen fleeing the scene were plastered across Florida. And someone recognized them. Here's where Aileen's desperation betrayed her. She had been pawning the victim's belongings. In Florida, pawn shops are required to take fingerprints and identification. And Aileen had left a trail of evidence linking her directly to the murdered men's possessions. Her fingerprints were on file from previous arrests for assault, theft, and prostitution. It didn't take long for investigators to match them. They had their killer. On January 9, 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested at a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. She was charged with an outstanding warrant for possession of a firearm, but police knew they had something much bigger. And here's where the story takes its most controversial turn. Tyria Moore. Police tracked down Ty and brought her in for questioning. And Ty? She cooperated, fully. She agreed to wear a wire and call Aileen in jail. Over a series of recorded phone conversations, Ty begged Aileen to confess, to tell the truth, to clear Ty's name. Listen to what happened. Aileen, desperate to protect the woman she loved, desperate to believe Ty was innocent and clueless about the murders, confessed. She admitted to killing 7 men. She claimed it was all self-defense, that every single man had either raped her or attempted to rape her, and she had no choice but to fight back. But here's what haunts me about this. How much did Ty really know? She lived with Aileen. She benefited from the stolen money, the stolen property. She drove the stolen cars, and yet she claimed total ignorance. Many people believe Ty manipulated Aileen into confessing to save herself. Others believe Ty was genuinely in the dark. The truth? We'll probably never know. What we do know is this. Ty was never charged with any crime she testified against Aileen at trial. And then she disappeared, given a new identity, protected by the state. She got to walk away. Aileen went to death row. January 1992. The trial of Aileen Wuornos for the murder of Richard Mallory, her first victim, begins in Volusia County, Florida. The courtroom is packed. Media from around the world descended on this small Florida town to witness what many were calling the trial of America's first female serial killer. Aileen's defense. She claimed Mallory had raped and tortured her, and she shot him to save her own life. And here's where it gets complicated. There was evidence to support her claim about Mallory specifically. He had a criminal record. He had served time for violent rape in the past, a fact the jury never heard because it was deemed inadmissible. The defense wasn't allowed to present it. Think about that. The jury never knew that Richard Mallory was a convicted rapist. They never knew that Aileen's claims about him being violent might have had merit. They only heard the prosecution's narrative. She was a cold-blooded killer who murdered a man in order to rob him. On January 27, 1992, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury found Aileen Wuornos guilty of first-degree murder. 2 hours. They recommended death. The judge agreed. Aileen was sentenced to die in Florida's electric chair, but the state wasn't done. Over the next year, Aileen was tried for 3 more murders: David Spears, Charles Carskadden, and Troy Burress. She pleaded no contest to all 3, hoping to speed up her execution. She was sentenced to death 3 more times for the murders of Peter Seams, Dick Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. She was never tried. The prosecutors didn't need to. They already had their death sentences. But here's what's important to understand about these trials. Aileen never stood a chance. She was representing everything society fears and despises: a woman who killed men, a lesbian, a sex worker, someone who refused to play the role of victim. The media portrayed her as a monster. The prosecution painted her as evil incarnate. And maybe she was. Maybe by that point, after 7 murders, there was nothing left of the abused child she once was. Maybe she had become the very thing everyone always said she would be. Or maybe, and this is what should keep you up at night, maybe we never gave her a chance to be anything else. So let's stop and ask the question we've been circling this entire time. What was going on inside Aileen Wuornos' mind? Multiple psychological evaluations were conducted before and during her trials. And here's what they found: borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, possible bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder from years of sexual and physical abuse. In layman's terms, her brain was wired for survival at all costs. Years of trauma had fundamentally changed how she perceived threats, how she processed emotions, how she related to other human beings. Here's what happens to a child's brain when they experience chronic abuse. The amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, the part that controls decision-making and impulse control, becomes underdeveloped. The result is someone who sees danger everywhere, who reacts violently to perceived threats, who can't regulate their emotions or think through consequences. Aileen Wuornos lived her entire life in survival mode. Fight or flight was her default setting. And by 1989, after decades of abuse, exploitation, and violence against her, fight had become her only option. But here's where it gets murky. Does understanding why someone kills excuse the killing? Does trauma justify murder? The answer, ethically and legally, is no. But it should inform how we think about cases like this, because Aileen Wuornos didn't appear out of nowhere. She was created by a father who molested children, by a grandfather who beat her, by a society that discarded her at 15 years old, by men who raped her, used her, threw money at her like she was garbage. Every person who failed her, every person who hurt her, every system that rejected her, they all contributed to the woman who stood on that highway with a gun. They all played a role in those 7 deaths. Does that make them responsible? No. The only person who pulled the trigger was Aileen. But it should make us think about what we could have done differently, what we should do differently for the next child who's being abused, the next teenager who's homeless and selling their body to survive, because there's always a next one, and we keep failing them. For 12 years, Aileen Wuornos sat on death row at Florida State Prison. And during those years, something disturbing happened. She deteriorated. The woman who had fought so hard to survive, who had claimed self-defense, who had shown some connection to reality, she began to unravel completely. In later interviews, Aileen made bizarre claims. She said she was being tortured through the walls by prison officials using radio waves. She claimed police had planted evidence. She became paranoid, erratic, disconnected from reality. Mental health experts who evaluated her during this time believed she had developed psychotic symptoms, possibly schizophrenia, the same mental illness her father had. The genetic curse had come full circle. But here's what's controversial. Was she mentally competent to be executed? That's the question lawyers and advocates debated. If someone is psychotic, if they can't understand reality, can the state ethically kill them? Florida said yes. The courts agreed. Aileen Wuornos was competent enough to die. In her final days, Aileen fired her attorneys. She stopped fighting. She told the courts she was ready to die. She said she didn't want to spend another day in prison being tortured. She wanted it to end.
I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
And how...
I'm all right with it, but like I said, remember, let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up. And let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer. I know they did, because I was no professional serial killer or anything.
Was this acceptance? Surrender? Or was it a final act of control? Choosing her own death on her own terms. October 9th, 2002. 9:47 a.m. Florida State Prison Execution Chamber. Aileen Wuornos was strapped to a gurney. The witnesses assembled. Victims' families. Media. State officials. Her final words. They were chilling in their banality. I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th. Like the movie. Big mothership. And all I'll be back. Rambling. Disconnected. The words of someone whose mind had fractured beyond repair. At 9:47 a.m., lethal injection was administered. At 9:47 a.m., Aileen Carol Wuornos, child abuse victim, sex worker, serial killer, death row inmate, took her last breath. She was 46 years old, born on a leap year. Died on a Wednesday morning in a Florida prison. 7 families finally had closure. The victims could rest. The highway killer was dead. But the questions, those remained. Aileen Wuornos' story didn't end with her death. In many ways, it just began. Her case has been the subject of documentaries, films, books, true crime podcasts. Charlize Theron won an Academy Award for portraying her in the 2003 film Monster. Her face, her story, her crimes have become embedded in American culture. But here's what troubles me. We've turned her into entertainment. We've made her into a horror story, a cautionary tale, a character. And in doing so, we've lost sight of the human beings at the center of this tragedy. 7 men died. Let's remember them. Richard Mallory, 51, electronics store owner, someone's son and brother. David Spears, 43, construction worker. Father Charles Carskadden, 40, rodeo worker, dreamer. Peter Seams, 65, retired seaman on his way to see family. Troy Burris, 50, sausage salesman, husband and father Dick Humphreys, 56, former police chief, child welfare investigator, protector. Walter Antonio, 62, security guard, working to make ends meet. These weren't just victims. They were human beings with lives, families, dreams. They deserved to live. Their deaths were not justified, no matter what Aileen experienced, no matter what trauma she endured. But on the other side, there was a child. A little girl born into circumstances beyond her control. A teenager abandoned and homeless. A woman who survived by selling the only thing she had. And at some point, that survival mechanism turned into violence. Where was the intervention? Where was the help? Where were the people who could have stepped in and said, "We see you, we'll protect you. You don't have to do this alone"? They weren't there. And 7 people died because of it. The question isn't whether Aileen Wuornos was a monster. The question is, what kind of world creates monsters? And more importantly, what are we going to do to stop creating them? You've just watched Downfall, Inside the Criminal Mind. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe. Join our growing community and experience a different kind of true crime storytelling. Deeper, darker, and crafted to reveal the full story behind every case. Coming next, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.